Recording.
Okay, well, thank you everyone first for being here this evening and spending it with us to learn more about how composting can make for a Jersey-friendly yard and invite wildlife into your backyard. My name is Sandra Blain-Snow. I'm with Ocean County Solid Waste Management. We're the part of the county that oversees your recycling and your trash. But we also run a program called Ocean County Master Composters. And this program is now celebrating its 20th year. We expected to celebrate a little differently this year, and we certainly are celebrating differently. So if I could just quickly, I'll just move on to the next slide here.
Hey, Sandra, I just
Yes.
want to jump in just for a couple seconds to tell people that if they have questions, please enter them in either the chat or the Q&A, the chat preferably, but if you're more comfortable with Q&A, that's fine. And you can see the controls down along the bottom of your screen, to open up either the chat or the Q&A. Okay, thanks, Sandra.
Okay. Okay, so I think probably the chat, and I may actually wait until we hit the midpoint before I take some questions, just so we can get it moving along. There's a lot to cover tonight, and I thank you for your patience. So without further ado, let me move on from our lovely Jersey Friendly Yards webinar and move into composting. So tonight we're going to talk about composting for Jersey Friendly Yards. And just a real quick, move the slide. I just want to let everybody know about the Ocean County Master Composters, who we are. Much like Master Gardeners, Master Composters are trained and certified by Ocean County, and they promote the benefits of composting. And we have been teaching the residents of Ocean County about composting for 20 years now. And we are the recipient of an NJDEP award for an outstanding education program. And now that I've made my plug for us, let's really get down to talking about composting. Okay, so most people think about composting, they think about doing it to reduce the amount of organic matter that's going into the landfills, to reduce waste. We think about it as a way of improving our gardens, improving our soil. But a lot of people don't think about the importance of composting and how it relates to wildlife in the garden. And composting is essential for a good wildlife garden. One of the things with compost is because you're improving your soil, you're reducing the need for fertilizers, pesticides. I don't use any pesticides or herbicides. The only fertilizers I use are organic. But another thing is that it improves the diversity of your garden. But what do we mean when we say that? So by improving the diversity of your garden, what we're talking about is compost breaks down organic matter, and it creates an environment in which organisms can grow and produce a healthy food web. And we'll talk about that a little more in one of the upcoming slides. But compost nurtures populations of food web organisms. And compost and mulch also provide food for the soil organisms. It also provides shelter. And it also provides homes for many insects. Some of these are pollinators, which we know very important for your garden. It also helps conserve the bird population. And it also encourages insectivores, which are it basically brings balance to your garden. And you'll see in the left-hand corner, I say your compost can be added to your Jersey-friendly garden throughout the garden season. So what is the garden season? For me, the garden season is any time that the ground isn't frozen. There we go. Took a little time. Okay, so here we have a picture of a typical compost bin. And I want to talk about how not only compost piles, but also leaf piles can provide shelter for wildlife, and I have the little home sweet compost pile. So you probably don't think about this. You probably think mostly earthworms when you think of a compost pile, but a compost pile is really host to many creatures. Some of them are there all the time, some just visit. It also can be a habitat throughout different times of the year for a wide range of species. Some of the things that we think about in our garden, many of them are going to be attracted, and this is not a bad thing. Bats, they eat mosquitoes, birds, frogs, toads, even small mammals, chipmunks, squirrels. And the other thing is when you amend your soil with compost, it makes it more attractive to insects and the many animals, especially toads. And we don't see a lot of toads these days. I know I miss them. I remember seeing them when I was a child. But if you look in your yard, it's devoid of them. So toads enjoy a compost pile or soil that has been amended with compost. Another thing is that if you have a compost pile, you put it in a nice sunny location, it may sound a little frightening, but it could make a nice habitat for reptiles. And the other thing is you will find that garter snakes, common small snake that you will find, they love to be in mulch or compost bins, even under rocks and logs. There we go. Okay. There it is. There we go. There we go. Okay, so we talked about a compost pile and leaf mulch as a place for shelter, but the great thing is it also serves as a buffet for all of these organisms. So if you look at the picture, what you'll see at the bottom is a pile of organic debris that you would find in a compost pile. And you'll see that fungi, bacteria are going to feed on that. These are things that we cannot see, but we'll see many of the invertebrates, and they're predators. So it's kind of like a food pyramid. It's a bit of a wild zoo, if you will, with different insects eating one another. It actually sounds like a very scary place, but all of this is going on and you're barely seeing it with the naked eye. The most you will see are some pill bugs, centipedes, earthworms. Those are the types of individuals that you are going to see. But these insects also provide a valuable food source for many of the much of the wildlife that you want to attract to your backyard. Bats, birds, frogs, toads, all the things we spoke about in the previous slide. And many of these will eat the insects and the slugs, and that acts as a natural pest control, and that reduces the need for pesticides. And I don't know about you, but my hostas have gotten eaten pretty good this summer, and I have to assume it's slugs. So that's one great thing about the compost pile. It's going to attract these guys, and they're going to come, and they're going to do the pesticide control for you. Okay, so just a few photos of some of the common creatures that are supported by composting in your backyard. Some of these you might be thrilled by, others you might find a little scary, but all of them are safe. No one's ever been really terribly attacked by a frog, but composting supports many types of amphibians. Frogs are the most common one that we would think of, the toads, but also there are newts and salamanders. All of these are acting as a natural pest control. And you might find, I have not come across this yet, but some of these critters may hibernate in your compost or your leaf litter. I think probably I'm working my compost bin too much for that to happen. And then we move on to the birds and the bats, the flying creatures that come. So New Jersey is actually home to a number of bats, but there are 6 full-time year-round species that live in New Jersey. And the most common, of course, are the big brown and the little brown bat. And we like these guys because a lot of the birds are consuming insects during the day. They're diurnal, but the bats are nocturnal. So they're getting the insects that come out at night. Another interesting thing, we have 480 bird species in New Jersey. And not only do they like to pluck the worms out of the compost pile or your leaf pile or your mulch, they also help your compost and your leaf piles because they actually provide aeration, fertilization. You'll see in the spring if you mulch your flower beds with shredded leaves or compost, you will find the birds actively working them, pull the mulch, pulling worms out. And in the process of doing this, they are turning up the leaf mulch, they're turning up the compost. You'll see the brown thrasher. That's one. Becky's better at birds than I am, but you will see them just flipping up the leaves and the mulch. And of course, rodent and weed control. Of course, when we talk about rodent control, we're talking about your larger birds, more like the raptors, not your goldfinch, which of course we all know is the New Jersey state bird. Some of the other flying creatures that we have, butterflies, moths, insects, 421 butterfly species. And everybody thinks about planting flowers and plants that produce nectar for butterflies, but not all butterflies consume nectar. Some of them like to feed on rotting fruit. So we're always telling you in a compost pile, make sure you cover all of your fresh green material. But if you leave that slice of cantaloupe, that overripe peach, that orange out there, you'll find that there are butterflies that will stop in and will feast on that. Another thing that you'll see, insects, centipedes, spiders, beetles. Of course, everyone knows the earthworm. I'm not talking a lot about the earthworm because that's the one we recognize the most. And I feel a lot of these other insects, people don't recognize how important they are. And before everyone panics, I want to say that spiders, there's only 2 poisonous spiders in New Jersey, and the chance that they'll be in your compost pile, probably pretty slim. Now, the other thing we talked about is mammals, and yes, a marsupial. Now, we think about trying to keep animals out of our compost pile, and we keep talking about cover up your compost to keep the raccoons and skunks and other critters out of there. I'm really not bothered by them, and I've actually found an excellent use for squirrels. As much as they drive me crazy with bird feeders, they're excellent in helping me to compost corn cobs. Everybody knows if you throw a corn cob into your compost pile, it's going to be there through multiple generations of compost. It seems they never break down. So one time I threw out some corn, and I found that a squirrel had chewed it up and left it littered all over my back deck. And that's when I got the idea, just put the corn cobs out for the squirrels. They'll break it down for me, do a little bit of the work, and I'll just toss it into my compost pile. So I welcome their help, anything that's going to help break things down faster. Now, one of my favorite creatures is the possum or opossum. And they're so very special. I know a lot of people find them scary. A lot of people worry about rabies, raccoons, possums, but a possum is so special because it's the only marsupial in North America. And the great thing about them is, like the other animals and insects that we've spoken of, they also do their fair share of eating insects, and they do a great job on ticks. A lot of people will go out and get guinea hens. Guinea hens, not terribly intelligent, but possums are an excellent critter to have in your backyard to take care of ticks. Now, I'm going to move on to reptiles. Anyone who doesn't like reptiles, you can take a quick, break here. But the reptiles in New Jersey, they're not very scary. No boa constrictors will show up in your compost pile. So what are we going to find in New Jersey? Well, we'll find lizards, snakes, turtles. The most common one that we all know of is the box turtle, the garter snake. And these are welcome visitors to our garden. Again, they eat slugs, snails, grasshoppers, termites, small rodents. And much like much like many of the other animals that you might find a little scary, they do a good job of reducing the rodent population, which, nobody wants rats in their compost. Okay. No? Okay, just bear with me while we try to get this slide to move on. Okay, here we go. All right. One of the things I wanted to dispel is the notion that composting only happens in the summer or the spring. Composting can actually happen year round. I certainly keep my compost piles going, and this is a benefit for the wildlife in your backyard. And just a real quick definition of compost. Compost is basically just the natural decomposition process. It's adding organic materials to a pile and just waiting for them to decompose until they make what we like to call black gold, a humus-rich soil amendment. It's not actually soil. It is a soil amendment because soil has other things in it, such as gravel and minerals, little bits of rocks. So spring, a lot of people think about gardening and wildlife and composting in the spring. Everyone wants to get out after winter and start composting and waiting for the wildlife to come back. So really in the spring, if you already have a pile, it's a great time. You can defrost your pile, as I like to call it, the first few warm days where it starts to defrost. If you haven't been working a hot pile, you can start adding materials to it, turning it again, getting it active. And if you don't have a pile already, this is a great time to start one. Summer is a great time for your compost pile because you have the advantage of longer days, more sunlight, temperatures are higher, so you can get your compost cooking faster. You can make batches much more quickly. And then autumn is probably one of the best times to start compost piles or leaf piles. You can use the fallen leaves to mulch your beds to help protect your plants over the winter. And then winter, while most people don't think about it much, I will admit to going out and just dumping stuff and running. I don't care for cold weather. But if you keep it insulated and you keep working it and adding material to it, you can definitely keep it going during the year. Okay, and let's see if we can get the slide to go. Righty. Okay, spring. Here is our toad friend. So I like to think about this as springing into soil amendment. This is a great time. Everybody's thinking about planting, and there are things. Okay, I will answer the question at the end of the segment. We will talk more about what doesn't go in a compost pile. So this is a great time for preparing the soil for planting. It's a great time to invite those spring visitors like our toad friend here. So what are the things that we want to do in spring? I have my list of 3 items. Actually, the first 2 are action items, and the third one is sit back and watch. So the great thing about spring is it provides an endless supply of compostable ingredients. A lot of us, we're starting to grow plants, we're cleaning up. So you can start a pile from scratch at this point. You can add to an existing one after you defrost it. So there's still a lot of cleanup to do in the spring. There's always leaves that come down after the fall cleanup. So we're cleaning up leaves that are still there. Also spent foliage from plants in your planting beds. Also, there are times I forget to clean out my hanging baskets and my containers, and they're sitting in a semi-frozen state in the backyard near my compost pile. Those are things that can be added, the soil from the plants, the planters and containers. It's a nice additive to it, plus the plant debris is good. And at that point, having gone through the winter, any pests have probably been killed off. Also, it's a good time to cut back perennials, shrubs, trees. And then the thing I like to say is you don't want your garden for wildlife to be too clean. Animals don't appreciate a lot of cleanliness, which is perfect for me because it allows me to be lazy. But you can take the trimmings that you have from pruning and cleaning up plants, and it's always nice to have a little pile of twigs and plant debris for animals to use. They use it as shelter. Also, the leaves that are left over that you didn't deal with in the fall, you can shred those, and you can add those as add an additive, a brown material for your compost, or you can mulch your spring flower beds with it. There's also an opportunity to improve your soil and maybe the new beds and the new plants that you're starting. And at the same time, it also is providing food and shelter for the animals. Also, leaf litter. Sometimes just leave that under the trees. Everyone wants lush green grass growing right up to their trees. In nature, grass, beautiful green lawns don't grow under trees. Trees drop their leaves or needles, and it makes a wonderful mulch underneath them. And that's really what we should strive for in our backyard wildlife preserves, if you will. The other thing is also grass clippings. We always like to promote what we call grass cycling. Most lawn mowers have a mulching blade on it. It cuts the grass small enough. You can add it back into your lawn if you choose to have a lawn. And it adds a fertilizer to it. But also, you can leave the grass clippings, and the birds and the wildlife, they will use those clippings. Another important thing, pesticides and herbicides. Try not to use those with your grass because we want to keep that out of we want to keep that away from the wildlife. So you will see a lot of birds building nests at this time. So they're going to use the materials that you leave behind for them. Also, you'll be watching for birds. They'll be pulling worms out from the compost. Also, any mulch that you put down. And also, the compost piles provide a wonderful refuge for species such as toads. And now we're going to move on to summer. Time does pass very quickly here. So I like to say, keep your summer compost hot. And one of the best ways to do this is use what nature gives you. And that's a lot of summer sunlight and heat. So we're going to use solar power for this. So the list here, okay, summer provides an endless amount of heat, which is going to help decompose materials faster. So the first thing you can do, and I'll talk about hot piles versus cold piles later. Hopefully I will have time. So if you started a hot pile in the spring, or even if you just got your pile going again in the spring, at this point in time, if you're out there working it in March, by the time June rolls around, if you've maintained that pile, you're going to be able to harvest your compost. And we talk about curing compost. And basically after the hot phase, where the temperature goes up and all the material starts to cook down, so to speak, we let compost sit for a while. They will recommend 8 weeks to let it cure fully. I'm impatient. I usually don't wait 8 weeks. I will start to use it on my beds. So far, it's worked for me. And you can use this compost throughout the summer to replenish your flower beds, if you grow vegetables. People think that soil is static and it just sits there and it does what we want it to, but we have to give back to the soil, and that's why we compost. So the thing is, in the summer, you have a lot of green materials which have a lot of moisture to them, and sometimes we come up short on the brown materials. We think of brown materials as leaves, straw, hay. These are things that we might have out at Halloween. So if you do come up short on brown materials, one of the things I like to do in the summer is I actually use shredded newspaper, shredded office paper, and also chipboard. And chipboard is jargon that we use in recycling to refer to all those boxes of cereal, tissue boxes. A lot of people think these are recyclable. In Ocean County, they're not. So I like to keep all of that out of the waste stream as much as possible. So I'll take my pasta boxes, cereal boxes, tissue boxes, and I will put them through my shredder, and I'll add them to my compost pile in the summer when I come up short on brown material. Another thing is, if it's a hot, dry summer, you're going to want to add more moisture to your compost pile, and you might want to move it to a shadier location if it's too hot and drying out too much. Also, aside from leaving the grass clippings, if you do collect grass clippings, if you use an herbicide, pesticide, or some sort of packaged fertilizer, let the grass clippings sit for about 2 weeks. We don't want that going into our compost. Now, grass clippings can be a green material if they're fresh. If you let them sit and dry, you can use that as a brown material. Summer is a very active time in the garden. So also, toads are going to be looking for a summer place. They're going to be hanging out there, and we want to make it attractive to them. So they like compost. They like compost that's added to the soil because it's easier to dig. There's going to be more bugs for them to eat. I mean, we like nice, soft, comfortable things. We don't like a hard surface. We're not, sleeping on bricks. Toads are the same. They like something that's nice, soft, easy to work, comfortable, and provides food. You can toss, again, the fruit scraps onto the top of your pile and let them sit there for a while. See if you get any butterflies. Also, you can sit out at night. You can watch for bats, see if they're coming to your garden, if they're visiting. And bats are a sign of a healthy ecosystem. We want bats in our backyard. And they also are going to feed on the insects that are in your compost pile, along with all those mosquitoes that we don't want in our yard. Now autumn. This is probably the best time of the year to start a compost pile. So now that we're moving into autumn, we're going to have a great supply. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the benefits of leaf litter, leaf piles, and leaf mold. And of course, I hope you enjoy my horrible pun, how much do we need? I can hear you all groaning out there, I'm sure. So without further ado, here we go. September, October, we're moving into a great time. It's an endless supply of brown materials. I know a lot of you are probably going, what is she talking about? Brown, green, all that. I'll go into that a little later. So autumn cleanup. Fall is the time when we start raking leaves, blowing leaves. Save your leaves. Please don't bag your leaves and send them to the curb. I mean, they will get composted. They will come to our county recycling center where they will be turned into compost, and you can come and pick up the finished compost after it's done. But I don't like to do all that extra work. I've literally never bagged a leaf in my life and taken it to the curb. I don't intend to start now. So being lazy can really benefit you. Keep your leaves in your backyard. It's a valuable resource. You can certainly, if you have a leaf shredder, you can put them through a shredder. If you have a leaf vacuum like I have, you can have your husband vacuum up all the leaves. I recommend this highly, the husband doing the work part. And also, the leaves are going to provide, again, a valuable habitat for all the species to overwinter in your backyard. And again, we don't want to be too clean. Fallen leaves, if left, will decompose on their own. You don't really have to do anything to them. We talked about shredding the leaves. Also, not being too clean. I don't like to prune back my perennials or shrubs in the fall. I like to let things go. Many of them will provide shelter for species in the backyard. Many of them will form seed heads, which will provide food for wildlife. And October, we're going to watch for wildlife. Much like the spring, fall is a great time to watch species, bird species migrating. And October is peak bird migration season in New Jersey. And birds, on their way heading south may want to stop by, and we want to give them something to eat for the long trip south. So, let them harvest some worms from your compost or your mulch. The ornamental grasses, a lot of people have those nowadays. We find that they're very popular along the shore area. Let them stay. People want to whack them down, make them look perfect and beautiful and manicured. Leave them up in the winter. They're interesting to look at. They catch snow, ice crystals form on them, but more importantly, they are going to provide food and shelter for many species. Also, ground foraging birds are going to live on the seeds in fall. And the native grasses will provide an excellent source of oil-rich seeds for birds. I just can't stress enough. Don't be too neat. You can always chop all this stuff down in the spring and make compost. Leave it for the fall and winter for the animals. Okay, winter. Okay, we're going to talk about winterizing your compost pile and how to keep it cooking, because believe it or not, you can still compost in winter. It will be slower, but it will still happen. So, to keep a winter compost pile cooking, an important thing to remember is keep adding material. So, question mark, winter hibernation. Yes, your compost pile can hibernate. It can go dormant. There's been many years when it's been particularly cold or I've been really busy and I've just tossed stuff out there in the manner that I tell people not to, and I toss it and I run and I don't do what I should. But you want to keep adding materials. You're still going to be peeling carrots, cutting apples, all those green materials can go in. I like to keep a stockpile of leaves close at hand by my compost pile so that I can add that, add it on top of the green material. And if you keep composting during the winter, it's creating a great fuel for the spring. So when you get started again, it's ready to go. And the process will slow down. I've taken temperature readings of my compost pile in the winter, and on days when it's been below freezing, below 32 degrees, in the center of my compost pile, because of the insulation and the fact that microorganisms are still working to compost, I've actually clocked temperatures of 80 degrees on a cold winter day. So as long as the temperatures are remain above freezing, composting will still go on. And ways to keep it cooking is just keep adding materials to it, turning it to keep the air in it, make sure it's moist. You may want to cover, if you have an enclosed compost bin, you may want to cover it, because if there's a lot of snow and rain, it's going to make it too wet. It's going to slow decomposition. Put a top on it. Keep it warm. Think about putting a coat or a hat on. You're insulating your body. You're insulating your compost pile. The microbes, they're definitely keeping active. Every year, it sounds crazy, but I do move my compost pile or my compost bin around my yard depending on what time of the year it is. In the summer, it's going to be in a shadier location. I don't like heat either, so I don't like standing out in the heat and the sun turning it. But in the winter, I move it to a sunnier location in my backyard so that I'm using what little bit of sun we have and heat to activate the composting process. Also, by doing that, I'm moving it closer to my house so I don't have to go as far to put items in it. And another thing you can do is you could use bales of straw as insulation. I have seen piles where people have used the leftover straw from Halloween decorations. Anything you can do to insulate that pile and keep it warmer. And then winter is also a great time. In fact, there's no bad time to watch for wildlife in your backyard. In colder regions, the reptiles, the toads, the frogs, they may end up hibernating in your compost pile. Certainly, if you have an area with that you leave undisturbed, animals can rest there. They can hibernate in the leaf piles and brush. Also, just leave the tidying up until spring. That way you'll provide food and shelter for animals. Okay, so this is going to finish the portion where I talk about wildlife, but I just think it's really important. This is some information I found. Anybody who lives in New Jersey, you know, we're the most densely populated state in the country. We are crammed in here, and there's not a lot of unclaimed or open space left. And it is predicted that we will be possibly the first state in the nation to reach build out, where all, open land is pretty much that any open land that has not been saved will be built up. And that means that basically human-centered activities, the shopping malls, the strip malls, all these places, they don't welcome wildlife. So it's very important that we make wildlife welcome in our backyard. And we can certainly do that by composting, by being a little less neat and tidy. And if you do this, you'll become a steward of your property, and you'll be developing a Jersey-friendly yard that will invite wildlife into your backyard. And it will be very rewarding because you'll be able to watch wildlife year-round. It's very calming, and it's just nice to see that the animals have a place to go. So at this time, if there are any questions, I know we had some in the chat.
Sandra, one person actually, you got quite a few questions about related to what you can use put in a compost pile and what you cannot. So I don't know if you want them now or you want to go through that part of your presentation.
Okay.
The one question that's a little different is someone said their compost bins are in the shade and they have lids on their compost bin. So she's wondering if she should remove the lids in the summer when it gets really hot.
It depends really on the weather. If it is a hot, dry summer, you're going to want to keep the lid on. You're going to probably want to add water to your compost pile. By putting the lid on in the summer, you're holding the moisture in. It's an intuitive, it's a visual, observe, feel, check your compost, but you can certainly leave the lid on. It just really depends on what type of summer that we're having. So I hope that answers the question. If it's extremely wet, you're going to want to put the top on. If it's dry, you're going to want to leave it off and get as much rain into it. So, and I think a lot of the questions about what can and can't go in compost, I will be able to answer in the second part. I'll go over the basics of how to start a compost pile for people who are unfamiliar and are listening to me say hot pile, cold pile, browns, greens. What is she talking about? So if I can, if all right, I will go on with the second part, and then we'll circle back to any more questions that people have.
Sandra, just one question early on, though. Somebody wanted to know about, will coyotes be attracted to the other animals that you're attracting to the compost pile? Do you have any comments on coyotes?
Yeah, actually, unfortunately, because of where I live in Ocean County, I live in a very small town where we're all kind of packed in rather close, and an older town. I've never seen coyotes by me. Deer, I've seen fox. I think maybe if you get to the more rural areas of our county, I don't know if we've had any coyote sightings in Ocean County, and I apologize for my ignorance on that. Maybe Plumstead, Jackson, you might see something like that. Would they be attracted? They may. But they might also be attracted to something as simple as maybe you leave, food out for, other like pets that you have. So my experience has been I've never had coyotes attracted to my compost. And one of the biggest things I'll talk about a little more is that if you turn your compost pile regularly, and if it does not look like food or something that they want to eat, they're not going to mess with it. So and if you're not putting things in your compost pile, that shouldn't go in. So I hope that answers the question, but I will circle back to that when we talk about the do's and don'ts of what goes in your compost pile. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on to composting section. I know some of you may be composting already. Some of you may want to try it, and you just need, a quick starter guide to how to do it. Composting is not rocket science. It's really pretty simple. If you throw something out that's organic and you leave it alone, it's just going to decompose and rot away. So I think of basically 6 basic steps to make compost. And basically, you're going to decide on your bin or pile. You can have an open pile, you can have an enclosed bin. At the very end, I'll review some of the different compost bins that are available or that you can build. And really, so we're going to, the importance of type of bin, pile, the size, the location where you put it. We'll go over the ingredients. We'll get to those questions about what you do and don't add. And then we'll talk about this really fancy scientific term called C-N ratio, which is basically carbon and nitrogen. So when you heard me going on about browns, greens, browns are the carbon, greens are nitrogen. These are 2 very important ingredients to a successful compost pile. Also, size to surface area, and basically simply put smaller items decompose faster. Moisture and aeration, how much rainfall you get or water you add to it, turning the pile with a pitchfork, and then time, temp and time, and it's basically how long it takes to cook. Composting is really nothing more than cooking. Only the finished product that we're making, we're not eating. We're serving it up to the insects and our plants, of course. So, okay, composting bins. So there's a couple of different ways you can approach this. It can be very simple and inexpensive. You'll see that a bin or a holding unit, as it's called, this is something you can make yourself. The one that I'm showing, that's basically some leftover, what they call hardware cloth. It's just a very fine wire fencing. One of the families in my town, they had some left over. They wanted to try composting. They built that bin. It probably cost them absolutely nothing because it was leftover material. Hardware cloth you can purchase at any hardware store like Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace. And they did say that once they did build the compost bin, they got some of the best basil that they had, made some great pesto with it. The tumbler and the turning unit gets a little confusing. I find the terminology confusing, but a tumbler is actually a round bin that's up off the ground. It usually has a handle so that you can turn it. A lot of people find this, the aesthetic is nice on it. If they have back troubles, they like it because there's no bending. You just simply turn the crank and it mixes all the materials. The one downside to it is that it doesn't have contact with the ground. And we really want our compost bins and piles to have contact with the ground because we're going to invite insects. They're just going to come naturally. So if you opt for a tumbler, what I would recommend is take a handful of soil and throw in there. You're going to throw some insects in there. You're probably going to get some worms. People actually order worms to add to their tumblers. So it's a great benefit for people who really don't want to do all the bending and lifting that you might do with another type of bin. The enclosed unit, which you'll see the black square with the lid on it, this is nice, especially if you live in like a smaller property or a community where perhaps it's an adult community or a gated community, and they kind of like you to keep everything neat and tidy. No one's going to notice it. It's very discreet. It's also excellent for holding heat. Most all of these, if you order them online or you pick one up in the store, they're made from recycled plastic, and you will usually see that they are black because, of course, that's going to help with heat retention. Some of these photos that you are seeing are actually at our demonstration garden, which is at our Northern Recycling Center in Lakewood. We have many units on display there. We are also upgrading the garden and adding more newer composting units. Just some of them are getting a little worn. And now the one in the bottom, the turning unit, these can be purchased or they can be made. This one is made from cedar, some hardware cloth, and then a few metal brackets to help hold it together. People like this, you'll see it as a 2-bin system or a 3-bin system. You can start building your pile in one of the bins. Then why it's called a turning unit is because you will literally put your pitchfork in there, turn the materials over, but then you will turn it from the first bin into the second bin where it can finish composting. And if you have a 3rd bin, that would be where you would allow your compost to cure. Okay, so we were talking about shade, sun, location, right size. A compost pile or bin needs to be 3 by 3 by 3 or 1 cubic yard. The other thing you can do is if you have a large open pile, you can do 3 feet by like a maximum of 5 feet. Or you could actually do 5 by 5 by any length. The larger piles, they get harder to turn. There's also, you're going to end up with dry spots or wet spots or areas where composting just isn't going on because it's just too large to handle. And we talk about the minimum of 3 by 3 by 3 because you need it at least that large because you want to retain heat. If it's too small, it's not going to be able to hold heat. You want it near a water source because if you have to add water, you want that hose close by. And you want it close to your kitchen or your garden because most of the material that you're going to make is going to come out of your kitchen. Or if you have a garden, especially a vegetable garden, a lot of the material is going to come from there. So make it convenient because you'll be more likely to compost on a regular basis. And we really do want it on bare soil to invite those insects. But like I said, if you have a tumbler and that's what you like, a handful of soil will add those insects. Or believe it or not, yes, you can purchase all types of worms on the internet. Just Google composting worms. And then either sun or shade. Like I said, in the summer, mine's in a shady location. And in the summer, it's in a sunnier location. We want to keep it away from trees and shrubs, which is very difficult to do in my yard because I have so many of them. And the reason we say this is just simply tree roots, shrubs, they like really nice soil. So they're going to head for what they like. And when they find out that there's a compost pile nearby, the roots are going to head for that. And it's only problematic in that when you go to turn your pile, you're going to be pulling up a lot of roots as you do that. So it's kind of a bit annoying. The other thing is you want tree and shrub roots to go down, not up. And if they find a compost pile nearby, their roots are going to work up into that compost pile. And we want to encourage roots to go down deep to seek out moisture and so that they can, so trees and shrubs can endure like periods of drought. So we talked about the right size, the location. Okay, so to answer the question about what can and can't be composted, we have our yes and no list right here. So when we talk about animal bedding, we're not talking about, the foam, orthopedically correct bedding for your overaged Labrador. We're talking about if you have chickens, rabbits, even guinea pigs or hamsters, any animal that is an herbivore, you can use the bedding and you can use their poop. So that's great to add. Brush and leaves, we're all going to be dealing with leaves in the next month or so. Coffee grounds, fruit and veggie scraps, and also with the coffee grounds, if you use a paper filter, that paper filter can go in there too. Manure. If you, like we talked about the rabbits, rabbit manure is great. Chicken manure is wonderful. It actually gets things cooking very quickly. And yes, I see eggshells. Yes, eggshells too. Eggshells are excellent to add to your compost pile. And if you should decide to branch off into vermicomposting, which is a worm bin, your worms will really appreciate the eggshells. As I said, if you run out of brown materials, you can put newspaper. You can shred that, just tear it up and throw it in there. Paper towels, spent plants. When I say spent plants, not weeds, not ones that have gone to seed. We don't want to get any weeds going in our compost pile. They'll appreciate the improved soil like any other plant. Also, tea bags. Tea bags can go in there. That's another great addition. I recommend keeping a little container. I use a plastic coffee container. There are fancy ceramic crocks. I keep it in my sink or on my countertop. That way it's convenient for me when I'm cooking to just put the materials in there when it fills up. I sometimes take it out, or I just leave it until my husband gets fed up and he takes it out. So I highly recommend having your partner take it out for you if you can get them to do that. So what we don't want to add to the compost pile, and these are the items that if you don't want to attract certain animals like our beloved raccoons and skunks, maybe coyotes, dairy products. Don't throw yogurt in there, milk, cheese, anything like that. It's not going to decompose properly. It's going to rot and smell really disgusting, and it's going to attract the wrong type of critters. Also, dog and cat waste. We don't want to add that because they're omnivores and carnivores, so we do not want their waste in there. Meat and bones. If you're going to add meat and bones, you're definitely going to invite some animals that you may not want. Fats, grease, oils, none of that should go in there. Fish, no, definitely don't want fish. And then definitely not diseased plants. If you have a plant that's suffering from any type of leaf spot, bacterial disease, powdery mildew, that's best going to the curb and going into the garbage. You don't want that in your compost. Also, invasive plants. Something as simple as English ivy, it will take over if left in a compost bin. It roots very easily. And weeds. Another thing you don't want is weeds, especially if you are doing a cold compost pile. The temperatures are not going to get hot enough to kill off the weeds. So those are things you don't want to add. And I hope that answered questions on the what to add, what not to add. Okay, CN ratio, carbon to nitrogen. You'll see a lot of information out there with, when you see a ratio, you think of this to that. You'll see a lot of numbers. I never put numbers anymore because it just confuses people and it confuses me. And you can compost without knowing chemistry or math. So carbon. Carbon materials are those brown materials that I was talking about. And an easy thing to remember when you build a compost pile is you need more brown material than green material. Brown material is dry, it's fibrous, it's low in moisture, it's slow to break down. And an important thing is it's going to keep your pile from stinking. So why would your pile stink? Because you're adding too many green materials. It's gotten too wet and it's gone anaerobic, which is basically a fancy way of saying there's not enough oxygen. So nitrogen, that's the N, the green materials I kept talking about. So the top photo is quite possibly the most beautiful flower pile I've seen going in a compost pile. Below that, we have the leftover fruit and vegetable scraps from our households. And we need less of the greens than the browns because they're very high in moisture. And if you get too many of them, they're just going to compact down. The moisture is going to get too high. And again, we may get that anaerobic condition, especially if you're not being diligent about turning your pile. But they are good for adding moisture if your pile is dry. And one of the things we talked about, you can add manure, and I have my little piggy friend here that I love. Manure, there's generally a correlation between brown and green materials. Brown materials, they look brown. Green materials, they're kind of green. But manure is actually considered a green material. It's high in nitrogen, even though if you look at it, it's brown. It's the one anomaly, but it will definitely get your compost pile cooking fast. Another thing is we see the shredded, the grass clippings. The one thing I have to warn people to be careful of, and one of the reasons we don't take grass clippings at our facility, at our composting facility anymore, is that if you get large piles of wet grass and it sits and it remains wet, it will create a horrible stench. And that's part of that going anaerobic. Okay, size to surface area. Really very simple. Smaller items break down faster. I always say if you throw a whole watermelon into your compost pile, it will break down eventually, but it's going to take a very long time. Whereas if you're throwing in the rinds, and I'll even slice my rinds up to make them smaller, it's creating greater surface material for the insects and bacteria to work on. So if you throw that whole watermelon in, they can only work on the outer surface, whereas if you cut it into smaller pieces, there's more surface area. So more insects and bacteria can work on it and break it down faster. So I try to cut things up smaller. I crush the eggshells before I put them in my compost pile. And the other thing is leaves will break down faster. You can certainly throw them in regular size, but if you can shred them or break them down any smaller, that's great. You can see the difference between the two photos. I see that we are coming up on 8 o'clock, so we will be wrapping this up quickly. We don't have much more to go. So we talked about moisture and aeration. You want to keep the pile evenly moist. If you have to, water it with your hose. Keep the top off and let the rainwater in. And we always say it should be no wetter than a damp wrung out sponge. If you're not averse to touching compost, certainly throw your hand, thrust it in there, feel your compost and see if it's dry or wet. And that way you can determine what it needs. And also after you add material, you're always going to want to turn it well. There will be move material from the outer portion of the compost bin to the inner, excuse me, portion. Also, you want to turn to redistribute the materials in the pile. The more you move them around, the more they're going to break down. And I apologize. Okay, time and temperature. Again, I talked about the cold pile and the hot pile, and you're wondering what on earth is she talking about? Well, a cold pile is what most people will do, and it's the easiest way to compost. You simply keep adding materials, and you really don't do much of anything with it. We're looking at an open pile that's just enclosed on 3 sides. But many of the bins that you can purchase, the enclosed ones, they will have doors on the bottom of them that you can lift up. So what you can do is just keep adding materials and take it, easy. You're not, too worried about things. It can take anywhere from, 6 months or 1 to 2 years to produce compost, but certainly you can always, if it's an open pile like the one shown in this slide, you can dig down underneath and pull out finished compost. If you have an enclosed bin, pull up the door and harvest the compost from the bottom. You can tell the difference. I would like to get a see-through compost bin so you could see the decomposition as it happens. Hot piles, they require a little more effort, but they're very satisfying. If you're a type A personality, you'll love this. And what it requires of you is more time and attention, but you have to stockpile materials. So that's why I always keep that pile of leaves around, and I will stockpile materials from my kitchen. What you do is you take all of the green and brown material and you add it all at once. You water it, you turn it, and one of the things I recommend is a compost thermometer, also available online, because you put that in the center of your compost and it will tell you exactly how well you are doing. What happens is as it starts to decompose, it will heat up, and the thermometer basically tells you how fast your compost is cooking. And when that temperature drops back, you know it's time to turn your pile and get it cooking again. And this one, the hot pile could take about 1 to 3 months, depending on time of the year. Certainly summer, it's going to work faster. And it's also, you know, it's a great thing to do. And I do recommend getting the thermometer if you want to try doing a hot pile. And fall and spring, excellent time because you have so much material. But if you don't feel like putting that much time and effort into it, certainly a cold pile is a great way to go. And so how do we know it's finished? Well, it doesn't look like the material you threw in there. It doesn't look like the cantaloupe or the leaves or the watermelon rinds or the tea bags. It looks like soil. It's dark, it's crumbly. You can't see the little materials that went into it, except for that corn cob. And it has a nice, sweet, earthy smell. And it's amazing. You will fill an entire bin up to the top, and by the time it's done, it will be reduced by 30 to 50%. Also, with the hot pile, when it's finished, it won't heat up anymore, and it will just stay the same temperature as the air temp. And just wait for, you know, several weeks to let it cure, and then it is done, and it is ready to use throughout the year. And just some contact information for everyone. Again, we are Ocean County Solid Waste Management, but we are also the Ocean County Master Composters. If you need to reach us, we have this great Scan Me. If you scan that, it will come up with all the contact information. But certainly visit our website, like us on Facebook. If you don't have the Recycle Coach app, please put that on your phone. It's a great way to find out about recycling. And I see we have a question. Oh, we have so many questions popping up. I can't keep up. What does, I'm sorry. Let me go down here.
So Sandra, there was one early on that was pretty interesting. Someone asked about putting store-bought cut flowers into the compost piles. I guess she's a little bit concerned that they might have some fungicides or insecticides on them.
Okay. I actually do add those materials to my compost bin because my husband's great. He goes out and he buys me a bouquet every week. But what I would avoid, you know, with those types of flowers, if you have a bouquet and you have these oddly colored flowers or carnations that are bright blue or any color that doesn't occur in nature, I would steer clear of those because basically what they do is they basically just set the stems in. It may just be food color, which isn't so bad, but I kind of steer clear of putting those in. I hope that answers the question. I think you're probably safe with the store-bought flowers. Many of them, I'm not going to go into any stores or locations, but a lot of times they will say that they, you know, are organic or come from organic farms. I'm hoping they're being truthful, but I have added them to many a compost pile without any problems. I see we also have a question about could you use a large trash can? Plastic or metal for a composter. Should there be some aeration holes at the bottom? Yes. You can use a large trash can. I would use a plastic one simply because it would be easier to add aeration holes. Certainly you can drill holes into metal. But one of the things I like to do is if you have an old garbage can that's seen better days and maybe has a few tears and cracks in it, certainly I would cut the bottom out, and if not completely cut the bottom out, certainly cut holes in the bottom and also around the sides of it. We do have information on our website. I believe we have one about how to turn a garbage can into a compost bin, or our Pinterest. That's another one. I also see, when is your favorite time of year to apply compost to your soil? To optimize the microbes colonizing the soil. Well, like everybody, I like to add it in the spring because I'm starting a lot of new plants. I'm starting my vegetable gardens. So I would recommend spring as a great time. Actually, anytime, spring and fall. And I like to add it throughout the summer because plants are growing very vigorously in the summer. So they need as much support as they can get. And certainly the microbes are going to be very busy spring through autumn. So I didn't really answer your question except to say every time of the year, with the exception of winter, is my favorite time for applying compost. Okay.
So another question was, when the compost is curing, do you continue to turn it and maintain moisture to keep it from going anaerobic, or do you just let it sit and you don't touch it?
Okay, at that point, when it's curing, you just leave it alone and let it sit because it doesn't require any more attention. It's doing its final curing process. And you don't have to worry about it going anaerobic because all of the wet green materials will be decomposed at that point. So that's when you just let it sit and take a break from everything. It's a beautiful thing.
Sandra, on the same composting curing, the point of curing is so that it's not a hot, technically, or what's the
Okay.
question?
The idea behind the curing part is that it is completely done decomposing. All the work is done because what will happen is part of the decomposition process is that it's going to use up nitrogen. A lot of times, the analogy I'll give you is a lot of times people will throw down the wood chips and the wood mulch, and you will notice sometimes that the plants that are constantly mulched like that will start to turn yellow. And the problem is that's a brown material and it's sucking out the nitrogen. But with the compost, you don't really have that problem. You're not going to lose as much with nitrogen, but it's really, by the time it's composted, it's just letting it do its last little bit of decomposing so that it's not taking anything more out of the soil or any other nutrients. It's done and ready to go. But I'll honestly tell you, I'm impatient and I don't wait the length of time that they tell me. And so far it's worked for me. So you could probably let it sit as little as 4 weeks. But I shouldn't say that, but I'm bad. Okay, what thermometer do you use to measure compost temperature? Well, it's not like your oven or your refrigerator thermometer. If you go online and you just Google compost thermometers, any site, Gardener's Supply, they'll have them. One of the, I don't know if they have to order them, but Baines Hardware in Point Pleasant carries them. If you wanted to actually go in and physically pick one up, I would call. But certainly it's available online, and how it looks like basically a meat thermometer, only that it's way about, I would say it's about 2.5 feet long, the probe that goes in. And okay, thank you. Great presentation on composting. Are there any other questions? I know we're just 10 minutes after 8.
There were a couple about what you could put in, but one caught my eye. Coffee grounds look brown, but do they count as green?
Yeah, they look brown, but they do actually count more as a green. And I know some people will use coffee grounds. I have a coffee press and a coffee maker. I will mix my coffee grounds with water, and sometimes I'll just pour that on my hydrangeas to make them more acidic so that they definitely keep their blue color. But yeah, they're considered a green. And,
Someone asked if you could put cat fur in the compost pile.
people always ask about hair and fur. You certainly can put it in. Oh, there's also abeyance and sea bright. The only thing is because of the proteins in hair, it takes a long time for it to break down. But certainly if you're out grooming your cat or your dog in the backyard, it's a lot more convenient to throw that hairball in the compost. And, if you want to keep certain animals away, if they smell, an animal that might be a predator, they'll stay away from it too. So, and were there any other questions?
There is one in the Q&A towards I think I got everybody else that may have been in there, but how do you move your compost bin? Is it open to the ground or on the bottom?
Okay.
You mentioned about moving it around.
Okay. I have a couple of different compost bins. All of them are completely open on the bottom. So when I'm moving mine, if it has compost in it and it's finished, I will simply rock it back and forth. If it's, doesn't have doors on it, I'll rock it back and forth until I loosen it. I pick up the bin and I set it down and I start shoveling the compost. I'll either spread it out right there. I have a tendency to put my compost bin where I feel I need some soil amendment added. So I will put it right in my bed and sometimes work it there. The other thing, certainly you can harvest it from the bottom if you have a door on the bottom of it. And you could also, scoop it out of the top, but that's kind of hard on the back. The geo bin. Yes, I love the geo bin. It is, if it's the one I'm thinking about, we give those away with the Master Composter program. It's actually, it looks kind of almost like fencing, only it's plastic with holes in it and you put pegs in it. Another good one that's very popular. Thank you for the recommendation. Some people really seem to enjoy it. I use my geo bin as my stockpile bin, and then I use an enclosed bin to my Earth Machine to build a hot pile with. So in a new spot. Yes, I just want to read this. Everyone can't say. I love the geo bin, easy to move and fill in a new spot. Highly recommended. Also, they're very inexpensive. I think they run for maybe $38, $39, under $40 for one. So a good product.
Someone did ask whether putting newspaper and paper towels in the pile introduced chemicals like the ink in the newsprint.
Very common concern. The newspapers nowadays, it's all soy-based ink. I know the other question is generally paper towels being bleached. Some people do have a concern about that. You could always purchase the unbleached paper towels. I use the basic bleached ones because that's the only paper towel my husband will use, but I've not had any problems with it. But definitely the newspaper is safe. The ink on that is safe. There's no problem with that. And I know, I believe I did give Karen, we do have handouts about how to compost. It's a quick brochure that can get you up and going with more information. And also, I think information on how to become a master composter. We can certainly make those available to everyone.
Yes, I will email the 2 handouts to everyone tomorrow morning.
That would be great. And if anybody needs anything or you have any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to me. Certainly email me. I'm always happy to talk about composting. And, certainly if you're having any problems, more than happy to troubleshoot it with you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. That was wonderful. We're getting so many great comments. Everyone really enjoyed it. Well, lots of great information. I love how you talked about all the wildlife that you find in the pile and around the pile.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time, especially during the pandemic, most of us watching the wildlife. So it's been very rewarding, and I'm so happy people enjoyed it.
I am going to stop the recording now.